Oh, and then one other reminder. Sorry, before I get going on this too, I want to remind you of some events that are coming up. Let me log into Canvas here. Of course. Okay. All right. So, let's go to the club here. So, Pachakacha night is Friday night. Tickets are $15 in advance, and at the door they're $20. So, if you want to go to that, you can get some extra credit. You have to be 21 and older to go to the venue, but it should be a pretty fun night. So, that's Friday. And then we have, I've been sending out announcements. So we had a transfer seminar that was slated to go on tomorrow for those of you that want to transfer to the U and you're in architecture, but we've had to push it to next week because the U is actually coming down here. So we'll talk about that in a second, but we're going to have what we call the transfer seminar. So students who are planning on transferring to the U and maybe want to know the best way to get through our program, right? What classes you have to take. We have a little bit of weirdness with our workshop classes, the numbering on them, because of our curriculum is a little bit old. The numbering system is old. So I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about the curriculum at the U as well, right? So that usually lasts between 45 minutes and an hour, but everybody who came to it last year really thought it was helpful. So that'll be happening next week on April at noon. Okay, so that's one thing. Pachakacha, we have the transfer seminar. Any of you who are wanting to transfer to the U, specifically this year, but also, you know, maybe in preparation for next year, the University of Utah will be down here tomorrow from 9 to 10:30 in this room. And they'll have some instructors coming down to look at your portfolio if you've already started to generate it. And if you haven't, they'll be giving you some tips and ideas on how to start your portfolio, okay? For those of you who are going into architecture, if you don't know, you should know that you have to submit a portfolio in order to get into the program, right? It's pretty competitive. So you have to submit, be accepted, and then you have to do it again for grad school. So these are always really good workshops to go to. This one's here tomorrow. They're also holding one up at the U on Wednesday night. So those of you that can't make it during the day, if you can make it at night, it will be, I think, at 5:30 up at the U. And one other thing that I don't think is on announcements, but is on our calendar. Oh, and I need to post your job posting, Laura. It's in here. It's in here. I promise. Oh no. There is a job fair going on at the U as well. So if any of you are looking for a job not even just in architecture, right? You all will know AutoCAD by the time you're done here. Let's see, this is March.
I talked to someone who works for Autodesk. It's in my single board.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. He does programming on the back end.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
You're like, can I give you some suggestions on things that you could fix in the right? I have several.
I don't know if he does AutoCAD specifically, but
okay.
he works for Autodesk.
That's great. It's probably a really good job, actually.
Yeah.
The U of U job fair is on Friday at 11:30 to 1:30, and basically every big architecture firm in Salt Lake will be there. And to be honest, everybody's hiring right now, right? So it's more difficult when you don't have experience, but I think a lot of people are taking on anybody who knows technology at this point, right? So if you want to attend that, I'll count that as extra credit as well, right? You can get up to 5 extra credit events in my classes, and they're worth 5 points each, so 25 points total. So this is a pretty good event to go to as well. Okay, now to start, right? Are you part of the architecture club?
I wasn't able to email Paul. I'm gonna look him up right now.
If you send me an email, I can send you a link to add yourself to it, and then you'll be able to view the events on the calendar. So if any of you want to join the Architecture Club through Canvas, just send me an email and I'll send you a link to add to it so you can see all these events. All right, so let's talk about a few things. I'm going to open up this drawing right here, block edit. Okay. So I guess maybe dimensions are a little bit of a finicky thing too. So I'm going to hurry and create I'm going to create a dimension type. I'm going to create a text style, and then we will take this floor plan, we'll create a paper space layout, we'll scale this on the paper space layout, and in the meantime, we'll make sure that our dimensions are showing with changing the annotation scale in model space, okay? So all of those things will clarify. And then finally, before we print, I'm going to show you how to load your pens again so that your line weights read, right? And just to reiterate, right, line weights are color dependent in AutoCAD, right? So when I generate these layers and I put specific items on those layers and they associate with that layer, they turn the color of the layer, right? So A-wall is yellow, right? And yellow is, it means something in AutoCAD when you use your pen file. It means a thick pen weight, okay? So inherently when you organize your items onto layers, and then when you print them with your pen file, you are assigning a line weight to your objects in AutoCAD, okay? All right, so first thing, I'm gonna create a dimension style. So I'm gonna go to Annotate, I'm gonna come here to this little flyout menu, and I'm gonna move through it pretty quickly, but I'm gonna point out a few things. Any errors that I saw consistently, I'll point out, okay? Oh, that's not the one I wanted. This is the one I wanted. So I'm gonna click on New. Oh, and it looks like I have one in there, but I'm gonna click on New, and we will call this Arch Annotative. Continue. Oh. See, I'm not quite on target. New. Now, the most important thing here right now is I need to click on Annotative. So I'm going to click on New. I'm going to give my dimension style a new name, and then I'm going to click on Annotative. Okay. Now, Annotative allows my dimensions to flux in size, right? So regardless of what scale I print my drawings at, I only have to have one dimension style, and that dimension style will get larger or smaller depending on how I scale my drawing, okay? So I'm gonna hit Continue. These settings actually look pretty good. So if I go to Lines, I'm gonna change that maybe to by layer. I'm gonna change this to by layer so that they associate with the layer. So those are kind of some of the things I'll look for here. I'll go to, yeah.
Are you good?
I'm good. Well, except for, you know, the one thing, the code. But that's
where I'm headed.
okay. Okay.
Look, everyone's here, and you're attentive even after spring break. This is awesome.
We were just
to my classes. Shelby's the best.
No. We were literally just talking about how rough it was today.
Hey, did you tell him you dropped 5 things on the way in?
Well, you missed on my way back up the stairs. I spilled half my cup of coffee on the stairway.
Is that why it was halfway?
Yeah.
Give her a break. Be nice. Give her a cup of coffee.
You know, I'm not quite awake today.
Half the day.
Hey, that's where I'm headed.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. Okay. I know half of it got on my pants, to be fair, not just the floor, but. All right. So symbols and arrows, you know, I have an architectural tick designated here. This is really just kind of, you know, we define these how we're defining them, but if you wanted them to look slightly different, right, we could change it to oblique, right? So instead of architectural tick, which is thicker, it could be oblique or whatever you want it to look like, okay? All this other stuff looks good. I'm going to go to text, okay? I'm going to choose a text style that I have already generated in my drawing. If I don't have a text style generated that's annotative, I'll create one, right? So here, I'm going to click on this little ellipsis right here, and I have arch selected, but that's not annotative, and I want an annotative text style, right? again, I want to set up AutoCAD now so that it's more, honestly, so that it's more like Revit, right? So that our text and all of our dimensions and things, when I change scales, they flex with the scale. So the text size is the right size, okay? So here I'm going to create a new, I'm going to call this Arch Annotative, and we'll make it Arial. Well, let's make it a different one. So City Blueprint, we want an annotative 330 seconds. Okay, this is a departure from the book, right? Our book is somewhat getting outdated. It's on our list of things to do to update the course manual for this class. So this is a little bit different in the course manual. Okay, so we're going to check annotative, make the text height 330 seconds, and I'm going to hit apply, set current, and close out. So now, you know, here I just need to make sure that my Arch Annotative text style is chosen, and something really weird happens, right? The text goes all funny and looks tiny, right? I'm not going to worry about that just yet, okay? All right, so yours didn't?
Yeah, mine didn't.
Okay, it's probably still okay. It's just how my screen's maybe regenerating. But no, yeah, that's right. So we'll see. We'll see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll go back and investigate, right? Okay, by layer, vertically. So vertically, I want my text to be above this dimension line, and I want it centered. And the text alignment is going to be aligned with dimension line, as opposed to like horizontal, where do you see it breaks the line right there, right? I want it to be aligned with dimension line. Okay, I go to fit. These look good. I want this annotative, right? If I uncheck that, this number pops up. I don't want to work with that. I'm going to keep this annotative. I go to primary units. We want this architectural, precision 8. That looks good. This looks good. I'm not really worried about much in here. It looks pretty good. Okay, so those are all of the settings I'm going to change. With annotative dimension styles, which is similar to annotative text styles, the main thing I'm going to worry about is making sure that when I generate my dimension style that I check that annotative checkbox, okay, and that when I create my text, right, same thing, I make sure this annotative checkbox is checked, okay.
Could you go to lines so I could just double check?
Could I do what? Sorry?
Go to lines so I can just double check that. I
Oh,
did
yeah.
everything right.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep. There you go. So I hit OK. I hit close. Okay. And I've just created an annotative architectural dimension style, right? So first thing I'm going to maybe pay attention to when I either use my dimensions or text, I'm going to make sure that the style that I just created is current, right? Because if this is set to Arch, and then I go in and I create my dimensions, right? Right? Oh, that looks pretty good, right? But then when I scale it, it may not look that great. That actually was kind of a good error because it actually worked out, right? But it wasn't supposed to. But make sure that when you create your dimensions, make sure that the style that you just created is actually the current style, right? So it's showing up here, it's ready for use. And the same thing with our text, right? Did you fix your error?
Well, it works on the new stuff.
Okay, is it tiny?
Still super.
Okay, so you think, okay, time to dimension, linear dimension, click, click, oh, super tiny is not working, right? The reason that it's super tiny is because our model space is set 1:1, okay? Now, we're gonna just set that aside for a second, okay? And I'm gonna delete this dimension style. I need to figure out what size I want to print this at, right? What scale I want to print it at. And then I'm going to set my model space to be the same as that scale, and then the dimension should be the right size, okay? So I'm going to just put my dimensions on hold, right? I'm kind of setting up my drawing right now. I'm going to go over to paper space, and I'm going to set my page up to print, right? So I've created my text, I've created my dimensions, I've drawn my drawing. Now it's time for me to set up my page, right? I'm going to start printing and dimensioning and doing all those things you do at the very end of a project. So this page, if I dist distance, I can measure it. And it looks like an 11 by 17, right? See that 1 foot 5 inches. Okay. Control P, print. This is kind of the fast way of setting my page. I can come in here and I can set up the size of the piece of paper I want to print, right? Usually by default, when you just open up a blank AutoCAD file, it is set to print on an 8.5 by 11, right? So if you don't change that, that means that, you know, and I require you to print on an 11 by 17, you're going to create your layout on a little piece of paper when in actuality your page needs to be bigger, right? And the scale is going to be off and things aren't going to look right, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the layout of my page. I'm going to change this to Adobe PDF. We'll change this to 11 by 17, whatever size we wanted it to be, right? And extents here, center the plot. Here's one issue that I think a lot of you had too, is when you were printing, and I could tell you were choosing fit to paper to make the page fit on your page size, you get a border around your drawing, right? So if you have a piece of paper like this and you have a little drawing in here, right, with your leaders or whatever, and I see another border, a line drawn on the inside, okay, I can tell that you've done scale to fit, because usually when you print, if it's a 1-to-1, I'm just going to see this object, but when you scale to print, AutoCAD says, hey, I'm going to take everything that you've drawn and I'm going to slightly bring it in so it fits nicely on the page regardless of the scale, right? Which means if I were to measure this, I couldn't quite measure it accurately because it has just been shrunk in to fit on the page, not scaled to what it needed to be, okay? So if I see a border around this, it's likely because you chose scale to fit or fit to page on your print dialog box here, okay? So make sure that when you're printing, you uncheck that, right? And you're going to change this to one, it's going to be 1-to-1, essentially. Okay, I'm going to hit apply to layout. Another thing you need to do is you need to make sure that your pens are set right here, okay? So if you're printing your drawings and you're getting colored lines, right, and you're thinking, I'm doing everything that I can, yep.
So every once in a while, a LaserJet option will even come up.
Yes, that's going to be my next topic. Okay, so if you don't have LaserJet and you print, okay, and you just have like ACAD CTB chosen, your lines are going to print in color, and that's wrong, right? We want our pen weights to read, meaning we want the yellow color, which means, you know, a certain thickness. We want that thickness to print, okay? So if this is available, use it. And let me show you, if it's not available, let me show you how to get it, okay? So I'm going to hit apply to layout, and I'm going to cancel this real quick so I can show you where to find that. Steve, are you having, I see some bad things happening on your computer.
It closed down on me.
Oh, good heavens. Hold on. One second. Hey, Jen.
I have some paperwork to decide.
Well, you made a good choice switching computers. That was Jameson's advice. Okay, we'll have him fix it later. Okay. So what I just did there, Control P without actually printing and setting these all up and hitting apply to layout, that was setting up my page to print. So it established the page size, it established the printer I was going to use, it's established the orientation, landscape or portrait, and then it would also establish what pens I was going to use to print with, okay? Now if this shows up, great, you can use it. If it doesn't, if that LaserJet CTB is missing, then that means it's not loaded, okay? So if you're in the lab here, things are always a little iffy in the lab, right? Because so many people use these computers that I would generally say that it should be here all the time. Yep.
So, is it the same thing if you use page setup from the paper space, like right clicking on layout tab?
Oh, yeah, yes, it's the same thing. Yes, yes. Okay, so in the lab here, and this is in general, you should only have to load this file one time on your computer, and it should be there forever, right? Unless you format your computer. In the lab here, again, we should do it one time and it should always be here, but you know how things go, okay? So if this is not here, let me show you how to load it, okay? That file is located on the CAD Commons. So I'm going to go to this PC, and I'm going to go to CAD Common, Arch. Oh, actually, sorry. It's right here. We don't even have to navigate all the way into our class folder. So LaserJet CTB. This is not a file that you open, right? If I double click on it, click, it just comes up with like a weird thing and, you know, it doesn't make sense, right? So I hit escape or cancel. What I'm going to do with this file is I'm going to load it into AutoCAD. And to load it, I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to copy. I'm going to go back to AutoCAD. And I'm going to come up to File. Oh, come on. And Plot Style Manager. And I'm going to paste it in here, right? So if that wasn't there, I would right click and hit paste. And by doing that, I've loaded that file, okay? When you're at home working on your home computer and you paste this into your AutoCAD, it'll be there until you format your computer, okay? So now, Control P, that should be available there, okay? Yep.
Where's Plot Style Manager?
So Plot Style Manager is under File. Okay, so is it because these are missing? Okay, so here's another thing, right? If these menus are not showing up, you have to go to this little drop down right here and choose Show Menu Bar. Okay, so then those will pop up and you can go to File, File, Plot Style Manager, and paste it in there. So if you are here and it's available, you're like, great, it's available, and you use it and you print and everything looks good, right? Then you go home and it's not there and you're like, well, it was there earlier today and this is the same file I was using, right? But it's not a characteristic of the file, it's a characteristic of your AutoCAD, right? So you have to take that file and load it in and then choose it as an option, okay? So what does that do exactly? Control P. If I just have this ACAD CTB and I preview my drawing, it's gonna look like that. That's wrong, right? If I choose LaserJet CTB, preview, look how nice. I've got thick lines for my walls, thin lines for my windows, medium lines for my doors, right? That's right. If you think, well, I don't have either one of those, I'm gonna use like grayscale. And I preview that. That's wrong, right? I immediately can tell if you've used your pens or not, right? Let's see. So all of these are going to give you incorrect line weights, except for LaserJet CTB, okay? If you think, well, how am I going to get it home? How am I going to put it on my home computer, right? You just email it to yourself and load it in. So you can take this file from CAD Common, you can attach it to an email, go home, download it from your email, copy it, go up to File, Plot Style We are having some troubles here today, aren't we? File, Plot Style Manager, and at home, you'll paste it in here as well. Okay? Okay. All right, so I've loaded my plot style, my pen files, right? I've set up my page to be 11 by 17. I've set up my dimension style, my text style, but I haven't really used any of it. I've done a lot of setup right now, right? Okay, so let's talk about, we're gonna scale this drawing, and then by scaling it, I know what scale to associate with my dimensions and text, and I can finish doing that stuff on my drawings, okay? So how do I scale my drawing, right? Well, I have this piece of paper, I have my viewport, you all hopefully know what a viewport is by now, okay? If I select my viewport, okay, and I come down here, this says varies, oh, hold on. Hold on. Mine has some things happening with it. That one. You are being recorded, Jameson. Okay, so there's my viewport. There was something weird with my other viewport. It was locked, I think. But if I click on that viewport, do you notice that this number right here, okay, it just shows like a decimal. So that basically means that AutoCAD took that drawing and it made it whatever size it needed to be to fit on this page, right? So it's not to scale. I can't measure it and get a quantifiable dimension off of it, okay? So to scale these drawings is really easy. I click on the viewport, I drop down here, and I choose what scale I want. Well, you may not know what scale you immediately need, right? You're like, these are just scales. I don't like have a sense for what they mean yet. So just try a few out. 1/4 of an inch. Well, that looks pretty good, right? But you could have accidentally chose 1/64. Nope, didn't work, right? But the nice thing about scaling with this way is that you don't mess anything up by choosing different scales. So I can choose 1/64, grab it again, change it to 1/8. And, oh, nope, I can change it again, right, to 1/4. Okay, better, but maybe a 1/2 inch is even better than that, 1/2 inch. Oh, too big, right? I think maybe the inclination is to look at this and say, well, if I scale it once and then I scale it again, it's going to scale a scaled object and then it's going to be all messed up, right? But that's not what happens with this system. I can continue to scale back and forth, right, to different scale sizes, and it will be correct every time. I'm not changing the geometry. I'm just changing how I'm viewing it, okay? So I've selected the viewport. I've changed the scale here, and that's really all there is to scaling. Right? When I say scale your drawing at 1/4 of an inch, okay, you set up your page, you create a viewport, click on the viewport, click, and you're going to change the scale here.
And that's the scale factor we have to type up, like on the assignments.
Yeah, so the scale factor then, that directly correlates to like your dimension, right?
Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yep.
So when you say scale to 1:1 ratio, do you mean just with the printing of it? Or,
So yes, so when I do control, is there an assignment where it said print 1:1?
well, I'll look it up. Sorry.
So here,
I would just see something like that too.
so there's two ways to go, well, there's two things that I could answer with that.
How
When-
did you get the numbers at the bottom instead of berries? Can you show me that one?
Yep, so when I click on the viewport,
Uh-huh.
so when you by default, like if I just zoom in and it fits, right? It varies because it's just picking like a weird number to make this fit, not like a specific scale. So that weird number or varies is because it's not to a specific scale. So to get rid of that, I click on the viewport and I drop down and I'm going to choose, like 1/4 of an inch.
I know, I just don't see the numbers at all.
You don't see numbers down here?
Mm-hmm.
Let me look at yours real quick.
Because I think I have the same problem as you did.
Oh yeah, this viewport in this specific drawing is a little bit odd, so let's just do a new one. Okay, so now you see.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
So was there one that said print in the one?
So, well, this will say something like plot this assignment in
Ah.
space as square one.
That's what I was wondering.
So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that means.
Okay, nope, that's good. All right, so when we're printing from model space, when we're printing in paper space like this, you're always generally going to have to scale items, right? Now, when we flip back over to model space and I say, hey, make sure to print from model space, okay, and I say at a 1:1 scale, what that means is that this will be 1:1, right? So your window, remember how you do a window? You create a window and you do that and then you hit OK and it prints it. That's what I mean when it says 1:1 in model space. Okay. This will be in the video, so if you question, you can watch it over again. Yep.
Well, there's also an assignment, sorry.
You're okay.
It says to print the drawing in paper space at 1:1 scale.
Right. Yes. So 1:1 scale, model space. Okay. Paper space here. I think where you're getting confused is the idea that when I click on this viewport, I'm scaling the viewport. Okay, so essentially I'm looking from paper space into model space and I'm zooming in and out to get an appropriate scale. Okay, so we're scaling through the viewport. But when I print in paper space, I'm still printing at a 1-to-1 scale, right? I'm not taking my piece of paper and this right here, if I take this and I change it to like 8-to-1 and I preview, do you see what happens?
So with that, you make the viewport that size and then, like, is that, then you don't have to worry about the scale and actual printing part?
Well, so the idea is that Paperspace is like a physical piece of paper, right? And it's a physical piece of paper that can pop out of a printer,
Yeah.
right? So you're printing the piece of paper 1-to-1 because you can actually physically print it. The viewport scales the drawing so it fits on that piece of paper.
And so on this one, we have the viewport so that it's almost the same size as the page.
Right.
But if you have like a little tiny viewport, that's when you would probably scale that, like do the actual
No.
printing scale.
Nope. So in Paperspace, you're always printing 1-to-1, no matter what. That can change in model space, right? But in Paperspace, you always print 1-to-1. It's I get it. It's confusing.
I think I hear you.
Eventually, you might wrap your head around it, right? But we'll just make a general rule in model space, or sorry, in Paperspace, this always stays 1-to-1. And so it's just a reminder that, hey, in Paperspace, we print 1-to-1. We scale the viewport, and then we print 1-to-1, right? And we can print 1-to-1 because the page is a physical size that will pop out of a printer, right? When we're in model space and I say, hey, print that 1-to-1, it means that the stuff that you're drawing, like those little puzzle boxes or whatever you want to call them, right? They're small enough that when you print them, they could fit on a physical piece of paper that pops out of a printer, right? They're 4 inches by 4 inches. So you have like 3 of them on a page and you can print a letter size page, right? But if you have a building that's 100 feet by 100 feet in model space, then you can't print it 1-to-1. You have to print it scaled from model space. Let me show you. Let me draw a little rectangle here, right? So if I draw a little rectangle and it's at 4 inches by 4 inches, okay? And I'm going to copy this. Okay, you drew these little boxes, right? Well, let's just do 4 of them. Okay, and it says you drew these little boxes, print these 1-to-1 out of model space, right? So what that means is that if I draw a rectangle and it's, let's see, 8.5 by 11, that's a piece of letter size paper, right? And if I move it around those objects, because those objects are so small, I really can print those 1-to-1 from model space, right? Control P, here's my window is that actual piece of paper size, okay? I can choose 1-to-1. We'll do portrait, and I'll preview that. Uh-oh, what did I draw? What layer did I draw those on? Okay, let's see, here we go. Uh-oh. I think we may have something going on. I think it's this file though. The idea, do you see what I'm saying? So this is 1-to-1. There's something with this file. Things are not quite working the way they should. But with this, hold on one second. I've got this 8.5 by 11. That's a physical piece of paper size, right? But if I take this same page and I say, hey, I want you to print this floor plan on this piece of paper, it has to be scaled from model space. Does that somewhat make sense? Landon?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. But then from Paperspace, right, I have this physical piece of paper defined and a viewport, right? So this physical piece of paper is always printed from Paperspace 1-to-1, right? And then the objects are scaled through the viewport.
So would the best way to print in model space would be to use the Windows option from...
Well, I think in general, you'll probably just get used to the idea that you're not going to be printing a whole lot from model space, right? Because it's just too difficult, and it doesn't allow you the freedom to do multiple viewports on one page, right? And so sometimes I have you print from model space just some practice to know the difference between the two. But in general, you very rarely professionally will ever print from model space. It'll always be through paper space. It's just easier, essentially. Does that somewhat help a little bit? Okay. Yep.
There's something I noticed, especially from either paper space or model space.
Uh-huh.
When you finish your drawing at a 1:1 scale,
Right.
on both paper and model space, and you at the end of the day realize, oh, I'm supposed to scale the viewport at like maybe quarter of an inch or
Right.
something, and you scale it and it fits, but then the text, blows up.
Right.
What happens?
Yes. So, okay, so we'll look at that next, okay? So he's saying, well, I draw everything and then I add the dimensions and then I realize, hey, this needs to be scaled at a quarter of an inch is equal to a foot, right? And the dimension, the size of the text on the dimension gets bigger, right? The idea behind that is that you've created your dimensions so they're flexible, so that AutoCAD knows to make the text larger or smaller, right? So that when we print from paper space, that the text is the right size, right? Because the idea behind a scale factor is that it has a zoom factor associated with it, right? So for a quarter of an inch, you're zooming in 24 times, right? And for a half inch, you're zooming in 24 times. For a quarter of an inch, you're zooming in twice as much. It's 48 times, right? So if you have the same size text and you zoom in 24 times, the text is going to be treated differently than if you're zooming in double the amount of times, right? So the quarter inch text will be twice the size of the half inch text because you have to zoom in more. Does that idea make sense? Right? So what happens when you change your scales is AutoCAD says, hey, you changed your scale, right? And now I have to zoom in double the amount of, times to scale this object, so the text bumps up by double the size. So that's what's happening when you change your scale factor, right? So if I look at this view right here, right? Let's look at that in practice, right? So when I've created my dimension style, I've created my text style, I've set up my page to print, and I know that when I print this drawing, it's going to be, let's see, was it quarter inch?
I thought it was 1/4.
Yeah, there we go. Yep. Okay, so I know we're doing it at a quarter of an inch is equal to a foot. Great. So that means that when I add my dimensions here, I have to tell AutoCAD, hey, you need to make them appropriate for a quarter of an inch scale. Okay. So let's pretend I forget to do that, right? I'm just working along and I forget that. So I go up to annotate and I click on dimensions and I draw some dimensions like this, and it doesn't look right, right? This has happened to everybody. It happened to me, right? I look at it and I think that is not right, but I created my annotative dimension style and everything is great that direction, right? The problem here is that it's tiny because it's scaling it for a 1-to-1 print, right? So essentially you're telling AutoCAD, I'm not really scaling this, I'm printing it as is size, which means that this little piece of text on here, wherever it is, will print at 3/32 of an inch. That's how tall it is. Now, if I'm going to a quarter inch, I can change this to a quarter. Oh, hold on. We'll do our dimension style so it actually looks. Let me change that back. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now when I change this to a quarter of an inch, it bumps it up, right? Because it recognizes that now, in order for when I print this, it's gonna zoom it in 48 times to get it to print the right size. So it has to make it 48 times larger so that when it scales it back down, it's readable, right? So this text right here, let me just show you. This text is actually 4.5 inches tall, right? Okay, so that text right now with that dimension is 4.5 inches tall. Okay, if I come over here into my layout and I look at it in paper space and I measure it, when it's printed, it's an 1/8 inch tall. And it's because it has to be zoomed in 48 times to scale, right? So it goes from 4.5 inches to an 1/8 inch. Does that make sense? From model space to paper space, okay? So what you're saying is, hey, when I, you know, maybe it's a small space. When I go from, maybe I've got all my dimensions, right? And they look all perfect. And then I realize, like, oh, shoot, I need to change my scale, right? And you change it from 1/4 of an inch to like a 1/16. And it jumps, and they're huge, and they overlap, right? The reason that that is happening is not because it's wrong. It's because a 1/16 of an inch, the scale factor is 182. So you go from zooming in 24 times to 182 times, and this text has to be a lot larger to get it to be the same size in the viewport. It's a really confusing idea, right? It took me a long time to kind of, you know, and a lot of like practicing to get it straight in my mind. Yep.
So I'm like doing the linear lines, but it's not adding the numbers that you have.
Yeah, it looks like.
I'm just wondering how that's pretty cool.
It's because of your scale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So by default, right, when you come in here and you have a blank AutoCAD drawing, this down here is going to read 1:1. You see how it killed my numbers? That's the beauty in this system, right? I've created these so that they automatically scale up and down. So when I say, oh, wait a minute, oh, I want this to be, you know, a 1/2 inch. Oh, there they are, right? Or I want it to be 1/4 of an inch. Oh, they're the right size, right? Before the days of annotative dimensions, we used to have 10 or 15 different dimension styles created in here, and then you'd have to manually go and change dimension styles if you change scale, right? Where in this case, all I have to do is change this little option down here to adjust the annotation scale of this view, and the dimension, it sizes itself appropriately, right? Now, I go back over to paper space. There's my lovely dimension, right? Come back over here. One thing you probably didn't note, or you did maybe notice. Oh, no, never mind. Sorry, never mind. Those are 1/4 inch too. But you will see by changing this that those dimension styles do change. The size changes because they're being zoomed in and out different scale factors, right, when you change the scale. But the nice thing about this is that even though this goes, you know, let's make it a 1/16 of an inch, and they're gigantic, right? If I go back to my layout here, let me do another little viewport here. This viewport right now is scaled at 1/4 of an inch. If I grab this viewport and I change it to a 1/16, okay. Do you see that those two pieces of text are exactly the same size? Okay, let me show you. Right, do you see that? So the idea is that the text might look different sizes in model space, but where it really matters when you actually physically print them, they come out the same size, regardless of the scale that they're presented at. That makes sense? Yep.
So is it best practice, say, if you're doing the overall and then you're also zooming on the bathroom, is it best practice to copy the bathroom outside if you're doing a separate set of dimensions?
Right. So the way that we sort of have these set up is so that all the dimensions are going to read in the viewports, right? But you can set them up so that when you, that's a good question, right? Because you've got dimensions on the bathroom. We only want to see the bathroom, right? But it's going to be at a different scale than the overall floor plan, right? So what you're going to do is we're not going to add this little lightning bolt right here on this little scale. We're going to uncheck that essentially, right? Because what happens when this little lightning bolt is clicked on is that it's meant to make your life easier. Like whenever you change the annotation scale, that annotation scale is added to every annotative object, right? And what that does is it makes it so that within your viewport, you see everything, right? But if you don't have that, then when you create a dimension style, it will take on the scale of the view that is currently available, and it will filter out anything else through the viewport, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a way to then like add those back in afterwards?
Yeah, so if you, so what will happen is you could have just these dimensions on the big plan, and then when you zoom in, just those other dimensions at the different scale on the enlarged plan, right? They won't show on each other's viewports. So then you're like, well, but later on, maybe I want to add those, right? So what you can do is you can click on it, you can right click, and you can choose to add a scale. So you can add the current scale or choose add or delete scales and click add, and you can add whatever one to that, and then it will show up in your viewport. Yes.
But, so like I was saying, so it is, you can just do that internally, you don't have to necessarily copy it outside.
No.
It's just a lightning bolt that would affect.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Makes it a lot easier because then you don't have copies of things all over the place. Yeah.
So my font was saved onto a different div style.
Your font?
Yeah, it was saved onto the standard.
Oh, it's not in this file. Yeah.
Well, I made it in that file.
In the other file?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you created a text style in your template file, and then we opened this file and it had nothing to do with that file, you won't get those settings in this file.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It'll take you, let me just tell you, it'll take you a little while to wrap your head around this, right? It's not an easy idea. Especially in AutoCAD, for whatever reason, it's a lot easier to understand in Revit just because it's always been that way and it works. But in AutoCAD, especially if you've used AutoCAD prior to the last, I don't know, last little while, this is kind of a new idea. All right, let's see. What other questions do you guys have? Any other questions? Okay, so I wanted to talk about scaling, which we did, right? The idea of scaling in Paperspace, right? We're going to grab our viewport and we're going to scale down here. One thing that AutoCAD added here, and at first I thought it was a great idea, but I don't really like it as much anymore, is this little grip right here. If you click on it, I feel like it's a little deceiving. If you click on it, right, it shows you all your scales and it says, hey, this is at 1/4 inch. Well, great. What I don't like about this is that if I chose like a 1/2 inch, it does that, right? And you're like, oh, what has just happened? Okay. So what this does is instead of taking the viewport and scaling it to a 1/2 inch, it scales it to a 1/2 inch and then it expands the viewport to show you how big your piece of paper would need to be to accommodate that scale, right? So immediately, if I were a new AutoCAD user, I'd be like, I've done something wrong. Something's wrong. My paper is not working. My viewport is not working, right? When in actuality, I think AutoCAD's trying to help you because they're trying to let you know, if you want to have this floor plan at that scale, you have to make your piece of paper larger, you know? So I think they're trying to help you. But I think when you're first learning, I think it's kind of confusing. So I might just stray away from that, right? And just click on your viewport and choose your scale down here. Okay, so scaling, setting up your pages, setting up dimension style. Oh, what did I do there? Changing your annotation scale down here, right? Those are all things you'll want to remember. I think the main thing you need to remember is that if you create an annotated dimension style and then you apply it and the text is so tiny you can't read it, just know that you're going to need to come down here and change the annotation scale of your model space, right? We talked about pens. Any other things that you need clarification on? Not yet, maybe, right? Okay, all right. What about blocks? Does the idea of a block make sense to everybody? Pretty good. Okay. Well, let's do this. I'm going to introduce the idea then of attributes. Let's introduce the idea of attributes. Okay. All right. So, okay. Hold on one second. I want to look at our schedule real quick. Pull it over here. What is today? The 26th. Another month has gone by. Okay. All right, let's talk about the idea of an attribute. So we'll start talking about the idea of an attribute today, and then when we come back on Wednesday, we'll talk about it a little bit more. And then next week, we'll talk about XREFs and how to draw elevations and different things, and that's really the end of our lecture, and then you'll be working on your final. Okay, I'm going to delete these. Okay. So hopefully, if you don't yet, I mean, it'll take you some time to get there maybe, but you understand the idea of a block. Okay, and I'm going to go to Cat Common. We're going to go to Arch 1310 Drawings. Okay, which one do I want here? Well, we may just be sticking with this one that we have. Huh. Okay, I guess we'll just stick with this one. I'm going to copy this here real quick. And I'm going to copy this one. Okay. So we're going to talk about attributes today. We're going to start the idea of attributes, and we'll finish up next time. Okay. And I think these might, yes, these have attributes associated with them. Okay. Again, hopefully the idea of a block somewhat makes sense to you all. What's really nice about blocks, right? We've talked about blocks a bit. What's really nice about blocks is the idea that you can generate one piece of geometry, right? Save it away and go out and find it whenever you need to use it, right? So it's supposed to cut down on you having to draw things over and over and over again. The second kind of nice thing about the idea of a block is that when you need to change something, right, you can change it in one place and it updates everywhere, right? What we're going to talk about today, attributes, is another nice thing about blocks, and that is that you can build information into them, right? Meaning I can embed a door number and a door size and a door material into that block, and then when I'm creating my door schedules, I can extract that information out to generate schedules, okay? Which is really nice in comparison to just typing text out for a door schedule, right? When you use like dumb text to create a door schedule, essentially you're getting out a highlighter, you're setting out a plan, you are setting up basically a big text box in AutoCAD. You're going like door 1, 3 foot by 7 foot high. It has, you know, I don't know, a wood panel, it's solid, hollow core, fire rated, blah, 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 right? And you're typing all that information into a schedule, okay? If you have, you know, 400 doors in a project, you're finding every door and you're verifying all the information in all those doors and making sure it gets correctly, correlated into a schedule, which is great work for new interns, right? Door schedules. Door schedules are a nightmare in AutoCAD, unless you use attributes. Okay, because the idea of an attribute is that you build that information in, and instead of having to type all that in and coordinate it with the door, you build it in and then you extract it out, and then it populates a schedule essentially. Okay, we're not going to get into the whole extraction and population of schedules in this class. It's more advanced than this class, but what we're doing here allows you to do that. Okay. All right. So we all know how to generate blocks, right? We draw our geometry. So we draw the window geometry. You also are going to start adding this tag geometry to your blocks, right? So I'm going to draw my door panel. I'm going to draw my door swing. And in addition to that, I'm going to draw a circle that is then going to house my attribute, okay? So if we look at this door and this window, right, I have my little placeholder for my tag, and then I'm going to define my attribute that then shows right there. Okay. Let me show you how we are going to add attributes. I'm going to come up here to Insert. I've got my block definition here, okay, and I have my Define Attributes icon here. If I click on that, I have my attribute definition dialog box pop up. So there's a lot of settings in here, okay? There's a lot of different visibility settings, and then we have the naming of the attribute, and then we have the actual text size of the attribute, okay? And again, I just want to kind of clarify that attributes are going to be characteristics of the door, right? So the door number, the door size, the material of the panel, the material of the frame, the hardware, any comments or notes, the swing, right? Anything that door, that defines that door, right? That is going to be an attribute. And you can really add as many or as few attributes, you know, as you need for your project. Oh, let me get back into there. There we go. Okay. So let's talk about attributes, right? First, we have our visibility. Okay, so we can make attributes so that they are attached to our block, but not visible, right? So, for example, our door here, really the only attribute that's visible right now is its number 4, right? Even though you may know, now you know, right? The door size, the door material, the door hardware, and the notes are also attributes associated with this door. But really what we're seeing is only the actual number, okay? So we can make attributes invisible. We can make them constant, meaning not changing, right? So door numbers are generally going to be something that changes with every door, right? Doors are not all the same number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So we have the ability to make an attribute a constant value or a fluctuating value. I'm not going to worry about verifier, preset, or multiple lines, but I am going to worry about lock position. So the 3 we're going to worry about as far as visibility are going to be invisible, constant, and then lock position. Lock position will make it so that the visible attributes that are shown on the door, once this is all finished, you can't move them, right? Which is good and bad. We'll talk about that. Okay, we have our attribute definition. We have a tag, a prompt, and a default. Okay, the tag is going to be, it's going to be descriptive. So something maybe like door, hold on a second, I can't remember. Yeah, there we go. Doorknob. Okay, and I think really these don't make a whole lot of sense until you actually see how the attribute works. So I'm going to add these in here. I'm going to go through the process and then we'll go through it a second time and talk about it again. Okay, so just know that these are going to be sort of prompt areas that prompt you to enter some information when you create the attribute. Okay, so the first thing we're going to define is what we want our attribute to look like. I want mine to be visible. I want it locked. I don't want it constant, so I'm not going to check any of those. I'm going to create a doorknob attribute. So we're going to call this doorknob. Now, a tag cannot have a space in it. It needs to be descriptive of what attribute you're defining, but it can't have a space in it. So doorknob. The prompt. And you're like, well, it's the same word. Well, just watch. You'll see what happens. And then we're going to enter a default value like round. Okay, so I'll show you where these actually show up in just a minute. Text justification. Again, we're going to choose a text style. Okay. For this one, I'm actually not going to have it annotative. I'm going to pick a non-annotative text style. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. I'm going to make my justification middle center. And my text height, I'm going to make it 4.5 inches for now. Let me just go through this. And then I'll show you, we'll go through it again and show you a little bit more. Okay. So right now I'm defining my attribute. I've made it a locked position. I'm tagging it as a doorknob. The prompt is doorknob. The default is round. I have, defined what I want sort of my text to look like in my tag area right here, which is I want it middle center. I want my text style architectural. I'm going to uncheck annotative. 4.5 inches. Okay, I hit enter on accident. Essentially what I did is I defined everything. I hit enter. If I would have hit OK, it would have done the same thing. But what AutoCAD is prompting me to do now is to place my attribute. Okay. I wasn't prepared for this. Hold on. I'm gonna have to go. Sorry, guys. I'm gonna have to go back in. I didn't want to hit enter. Okay, let me do that again. Define attribute. Okay. Door no. Middle center. Arch. 4.5 inches. Okay. So I've just defined my attribute. By doing all of this text and by assigning, a justification, a text style, and a height, I've just defined my attribute. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to be bumped out into model space, and then I'm going to define where I want that attribute to live, right? Which is going to be the center of this circle that houses the tag. Click, and it places my attribute right there. Okay. All right. So what does that mean, right? How do I actually get that to function? The way I'm going to get this to function is I'm going to define the block. Okay. Don't worry, we'll go over this again. I'll define these and then we'll go over it again on Wednesday. I think it'll make more sense. So I've drawn my block. I've drawn a tag, I guess a housing for the tag. I've defined my attribute, right? But my attribute doesn't take effect until I actually define this as a block. So the process of creating attributes is kind of a two-step process. I define the attribute and then I create the block, and that will activate the attribute. Okay, so I'm going to click on create block. I'm just going to create a regular old block just for purposes of we're in class and I want to make this a little bit more quick. Pick point, click, select objects, enter, hit OK. When I hit OK, the attribute is activated. It says, okay, great. You're creating a block and now the attribute is activated. Would you like to input the information associated with that attribute, right? So you're going to see that doorknob, that was my prompt, right? Doorknob. Well, the default value for that is round. Maybe I do something like, I don't know, we'll make it ABC doorknob, right? I hit OK, and there's my attribute, ABC. Okay, let me copy this. I'm going to explode this block that I just created. This right here is my tag, right? Remember I typed in doorknob, one word, no spaces. That is my tag. This is the prompt pops up, click, click. Oh shoot, I can't. The prompt pops up when you activate the attribute and you type in the information, okay? Let me do this all one more time. I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to actually explode this block and delete that tag. And I'm going to start from the very beginning, okay? I'm going to delete this little circle, okay? To create a block with an attribute, I draw my block, just like normal. Okay, I go to home, I create a circle, and I draw my little housing for my attribute, okay? I go to annotate, I go to, insert, define attribute. And now you know what the tag is. The tag is that placeholder in the block, right? The prompt is what pops up when I activate the attribute by blocking the object. I want this to be locked, so the tag here, let's call this door number. Door number. All the text, I want this to be middle center. If I had chosen left, my attribute would be left justified in the circle, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? We want it to be right in the center of that circle. That's why I chose middle center. My text style, my text height. I chose 4.5 inches because it's a good size to fit in that block right there. Okay, so I hit OK. I get bumped out of the attribute definition. I click in the center of that circle to place my attribute, and it middle center justifies it in that circle. Okay. Okay, I've added one attribute. I can add another if I'd like. So I can come back up here to define attributes. Okay. I'm going to create another one. Now the second one, really I don't want to see it. I want that information contained in the block, right? But I don't want to see it. So the second one I'm going to make invisible. Check. I'm going to make this maybe door panel. Door panel. And the default, maybe we'll just put a little dash. Okay. Now, because I've already created one attribute, the second one that I create, AutoCAD maybe knows that I want to create it in the same manner aesthetically as the first one. So I can choose align below previous attribute definition. Click. And I don't have to define these text settings. They automatically mirror this one. I hit OK. And it bumps it in right below there. Okay, let me do one more. Okay, this one's going to be the door hardware. The default, we'll just do a dash. And I do want that invisible. If I create it without this checked, I have to delete it and redo it. I'm going to click on align below previous and hit OK. Door hardware. Okay. So by doing just what I've done here, I've defined these attributes. When I block that door, they activate. Okay, so now that I've created them, I'm going to come up here to create block. We'll call this, you know, a-door-attribute. I'm going to do my pick point. Click my convert or select objects. I'm going to select all of my objects, hit enter, and I'm going to hit OK. And now, as I block that block, my attributes are activated, and it says, hey, what is the door number for this block, right? Well, we'll make it like door number 10. What is the door panel? Well, let's type in cherry. What is the door hardware? We'll make it, you know, a privacy. And hit OK. So now all of that information is built into that door. Okay. If I click on my attribute twice very quickly, click. This is called Batman, right? Block attribute editor, Batman. It's a shortcut for it, B-A-T-T-M-A-N. But I can come in here and I can click on this and alter it, right? Instead of 10, let's make it 8. Instead of cherry, let's make it walnut. Instead of a privacy, let's make it a passage and hit OK, right? And now that information, you see number 8, it's changed, okay? Now the really like nice, good and bad thing about attributes, the good thing is that they're kind of highly transferable. And what I mean by that is that if I wanted to create another door, right? If I wanted to make this a larger door, like stretch the door, I could do that. And I could just leave these attributes, reblock it, and use them again. So I don't have to continue to redefine them, right? They don't, you know, these don't somewhat connect themselves to this door, right? The second I reblock these, they become their own independent attributes for that specific door with that specific name, okay? So I can create one set, and then I can copy them to other items, and they'll work just fine, okay? So attributes are highly editable in that aspect. But with that said, they can be a little finicky, right? So in the actual attribute definition, if you don't get it done right the first time and it's not functioning correctly, my best advice is to delete it and redo it, right? But you will have an assignment where you'll create, you know, some doors and you'll have to assign some attributes to that door, right? You can create the door, you can create the attribute, and then when you have to create the second and third one, you can just copy them, right? So let's look at here real quick. Let's go to assignments. Let's see. Okay. Let's look at this. Okay, so you have a bunch of attributes you have to define for these for these objects, right? You have a left-hand door, a right-hand door, a double door, right? And so for me, if I were doing this assignment, right, I would draw this one door. Let's see. Luckily, I have it already generated, right? I can copy these around and these attributes will work. But essentially what I would do is if I were doing this assignment is I would draw this door, I would add the attributes, right? I would block it, and then those attributes would activate, okay? And then to do this door right here, right? Having that first door already created, right? I would copy it over, or I would mirror it. I'm not gonna, and then I would copy these attributes over, CO, copy, from the center to the center, and then I would reblock this one, and I'd have my second door, right? And I wouldn't have to redefine everything. Now when I go to block, I'm cheating. I'm being lazy. Right? Those work just fine. Yep.
So when creating the block, it doesn't really matter the type of block we use. Do we have to just create the right block or W block? Or just
You're going to want to create W blocks, yeah. I would say that I'm just kind of being lazy. I don't want to save them out on my computer, but I think in general, forever, you'll just be doing W blocks, yeah, because you'll use your blocks over and over and over and over again. Yep. Right, so I have this door, and right now I need to create this door. Right, I'm just going to CO, copy this one down, and explode it, X, select it, MI, mirror, and I could mirror over all of this information and have my door there, right? So what's nice about these is I can create one, you know, and then copy it over, explode it, mirror it, copy the attributes, you know, finish that one, copy it down, explode it, mirror it, do the attributes again, okay? But your assignment is going to be to create these blocks with these attributes, these windows with these attributes, right? It's extensive, right? And then there's some furniture, right? That it's going to have attributes associated with it. Everything in a set of construction drawings gets scheduled. So windows have a schedule, doors have a schedule, furniture has a schedule, and it's nice to build that information into the specific object so you can then extract it out and the schedule generates, right? As opposed to you going through with a highlighter, finding every instance, you know, highlighting it and typing it all in, right? I put this up on Canvas, so I have assigned it, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to go over this. I'm going to stop here, but I'd like to go over this information again next time. So we'll go over attributes one more time, and we'll talk about title blocks with attributes next time as well, okay? So we will stop there, I think. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. I'll push this assignment. Let me see. I have it due on, I think if you have a good amount of time, March 29th. I'm going to make it due next week. Okay? So you have a little bit of time over the weekend to do it. Yeah. Yep. I will do that. Yep. Okay. And I will stop.